Ilara stood by the mahogany bookshelf, fingering the spine of a well-worn novel as the murmur of the crowd swirled around her. The charity book event was held in the grand atrium of her parents' old estate, a place she'd avoided for years. Tonight, though, she'd agreed to help backstage, handing out programs, ushering guests, pouring wine. She needed normalcy after months of restless nights and unspoken fears. That was when she saw him. Daniel stepped forward to take the lectern, tall and composed, dark suit precise against the polished wood. His voice, when he spoke, was low and measured, as if every word had already passed through a careful filter. He read from a short story about forgiveness, an odd choice for charity, but his tone spun it into something hopeful. Ilara's breath hitched. She felt seen. After the reading, guests clustered to applaud. Ilara navigated through clusters of lavender gowns and pinstripe jackets, wanting only to slip past unnoticed. Instead, Daniel approached. "You looked like you knew every line," he said, nodding toward the podium. His eyes were an unreadable shade between storm gray and deep brown. She laughed softly. "Not quite, but I appreciate the thought." He offered his hand, gentle, sure. "I'm Daniel." Ilara. Her name felt right on his tongue. They moved toward a quiet alcove where a single lantern cast soft light on stone walls. Their conversation tumbled easily. Books they loved, childhood dreams, small kindnesses that changed lives. He listened as though her words mattered more than any grand speech. When the event wound down, Ilara found herself lingering by the exit. The night air was cool and fragrant with jasmine. Daniel joined her, coat slung over one arm. He smiled a little shy. "Would you like to walk?" They strolled down the gravel path, the estate's lanterns glowing like distant fireflies. Ilara realized how loud her heart sounded in her ears. He made the world quiet around her, every doubt, every regret, drowned out by the simple clarity of his presence. Before parting, Daniel paused beneath the flowering arbor. "May I see you again?" She met his gaze. "I'd like that." As she climbed into her car, Ilara felt the first flutter of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. Rain fell in soft halos around the ancient tree that towered over her parents' garden. Ilara arrived early, hands clasped against the chill, breath clouding in front of her. Daniel had told her there was something he wanted to show her, something meaningful. She stole a glance at the stone bench beneath the rain tree, its branches dripping silver droplets. Daniel stepped from behind the tree, coat draped over one arm. His hair gleamed wet, a few strands plastered against his forehead. He offered her his hand, eyes earnest. "Ilara, do you remember when you told me this tree was planted the day you were born?" She nodded, surprised he'd remembered. "My parents always said it would grow strong, like a guardian over our family." He crouched to unbutton his coat, revealing a small velvet box in his hand. Ilara's heart lurched. "Daniel, I've watched you laugh beneath this tree, seen you cry beneath its branches. You've carried me through my darkest hours. I can't imagine my life without you." He opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the lantern light. Simple band, small diamond glinting like a secret star. Tears blurred Ilara's vision. "Daniel." He rose, slipping the ring onto her finger with gentle precision. "Will you marry me?" Her voice caught. The rain tapped a soft rhythm above them. Around the garden, shadows deepened, and all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. "Yes." He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. The world blurred, rain, lanterns, the beating of her chest. Grace, her sister, emerged from the house smiling brightly, applauding from the patio. Ilara blushed but didn't let go of Daniel. In that moment, tears and laughter mingled as the rain tree bore witness to their promise. That night, as they drove home with the windows down, rain streaking glass and wind tousling her hair, Ilara stared at her ring, warm against her skin. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. "I love you," he said simply. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you too." And beneath the rain tree, in the heart of her childhood home, something new and powerful had taken root. Grace arrived like a burst of color in Ilara's life. She was loud, spontaneous, brilliant, everything Ilara was not. While Ilara planned every detail, Grace sketched ideas on napkins, shouting "Trust me," with a grin. At family dinners, she recounted escapades that made Alara clutch her napkin in mortified delight. When Alara announced her engagement, Grace's smile was dazzling. Too dazzling, Alara thought later. Grace flung her arms around her sister, pressing her cheek against Alara's. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Over the next weeks, Grace hovered like a flaming firework over the wedding plans. She chose florals Alara never would have considered: vibrant peonies, fuchsia dahlias. She booked the caterer who served fusion tapas. Alara watched in wonder and relief as ideas poured from Grace. One afternoon, Grace burst into Alara's study, where she sat at the laptop. "I found the perfect invitations. Ivory cardstock with hand-letter calligraphy. And guess what?" She twirled a pen between her fingers. "I know a florist who will make the aisle look like a moonlit forest." Alara smiled, swept up in Grace's enthusiasm. "You're incredible." Grace's grin softened. "That's what big sisters are for." She paused, then cocked her head. "You know, you can lean on me. Always." Alara nodded, her chest tightening with love. Love for the sister who could light up a room. But beneath Grace's sparkle, something flickered, an edge Alara couldn't name. Later, as Grace packed up her sketchpad, Alara noticed a shadow slip across her sister's face. Grace's lips thinned, just for an instant, before she plastered on a bright smile. "Bridesmaids' dresses next week." Alara agreed, though unease hummed in her veins. Grace had always been the firework, but even fireworks fade, and Alara wondered what would remain when the spark settled. The day Grace was officially named Maid of Honor dawned bright and warm. Alara met her parents in the sunlit breakfast room, where Grace arrived in a flowery sundress, arms full of fabric swatches and ribbon samples. "Good morning, ladies," Grace chirped, setting her pile on the table. Their mother, composed in pearls, reached over to smooth an errant curl. "Darling, I think Alara and Daniel want you to lead the planning committee." Grace's eyes danced. "Absolutely. First order, venue walkthrough tomorrow at sunrise. I want the light hitting the rose garden just right." She produced 3 phone photos, tapping each with excitement. Alara hesitated. Sunrise might be too early. Grace laughed, bright as bells. "Trust me, it'll be magical." Their father cleared his throat. "Alara, dear, you're sure you're comfortable?" Alara forced a smile. "Of course. Grace has fantastic ideas." Inside, though, she felt a prickle. What if Grace's vision scattered hers entirely? That evening, Alara met Daniel in his study. He was hunched over architectural plans, brow furrowed. "Dinner," she offered. He looked up, eyes warm. "I'd love that. Something quick. I've got a meeting at 7. Over pasta in the kitchen, Alara recounted Grace's plans. Daniel laughed. "Your sister is amazing." He reached across the table, brushing her hand. "I trust her taste." Alara nodded, relief flooding her. After dinner, she found Grace in the garden, sketching petals in her notepad. Grace looked up and grinned, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Alara, you okay?" She swallowed. I'm grateful for you." Grace closed her notebook. "Always." Yet in her eyes, Alara caught a fleeting glint. Not quite regret, not quite guilt. Then Grace smiled and ducked inside. Alara stood alone, moonlight pooling at her feet, and wondered if she'd given away too much of herself. Daniel's absence began as small cracks. He'd arrive home at odd hours, late from work events that Alara never attended. He stopped calling as often, preferring curt, "I'm fine" texts. Alara tried to brush it off. Stress. He must be under pressure. One evening, she waited in the hallway, rehearsing a conversation. When Daniel finally appeared, cheeks flushed, keys in hand, she reached for him. "Busy night." He nodded, hanging his coat. "Very." He avoided her eyes. Alara's stomach twisted. She purchased a bottle of champagne to open with him, something celebratory. But in the living room, Daniel sank onto the couch and stared at his phone screen. Alara set the glasses down gently. "Everything okay?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Of course." Then he excused himself to the study. Alone, Alara's throat tightened. The cork popped half-heartedly. She poured 2 glasses and carried one behind her back, intending to surprise him. In the study, she pushed open the door. Daniel sat at his desk, head bent over paperwork. On the floor by his chair lay a pair of earrings, bright gold hoops she recognized at once as Grace's. Ilara's breath caught. She held up her glass like a lifeline. Daniel. He looked up, startled. He blinked, then tried to laugh it off. Oh, those are Grace's. She must have left them when she came by. She swallowed. Grace never visits you here. He ran a hand through his hair. She dropped by when I was late and needed to borrow. Ilara set the champagne down. The sound of the glass against the table felt too loud. Daniel. He stood, voice low. It's nothing. Ilara's pulse thundered. You know what fractures glass, right? Tiny cracks you don't see until it shatters. Daniel's face drained. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Ilara realized then that without trust, love was just an illusion, beautiful but unsound. She turned and walked out, leaving the earrings behind. The door clicked closed, echoing in the empty hallway. Outside, the night air was sharp. Ilara stood beneath the rain tree where they'd become engaged, and for the first time, she questioned the foundation they'd built. Ilara closed the door to her small apartment behind her, the soft click echoing in the quiet hallway. It was past midnight, and the dim overhead light flickered as she slipped out of her coat. The apartment felt empty, sterile. She always arrived late. Another late night at the bookstore, reorganizing inventory, cataloging returned volumes. It was her sanctuary now, a refuge from the turmoil she'd left behind. Her phone buzzed on the console table, a message from Daniel. Did you get home okay? I got tied up at work. Miss you. She stared at the screen. Tied up at work. Again. It was becoming a mantra. She smiled wanly and typed back, I'm fine. Sleep well. Then she dropped the phone and exhaled. In the living room, the lamp glowed weakly. Ilara sank onto the sofa and reached for her tea mug. She wrapped her fingers around its warmth. Grace's laughter from last summer seemed miles away. Now there was only silence, and the suspicion that had settled in her bones like a stone. The first time she noticed something off, she had returned early from the bookstore because she forgot her glasses. She'd unlocked the door with her spare key and stepped inside, humming under her breath. The soft light through the blinds revealed a shape on the couch, Grace, alive and stirring, perched beside Daniel's discarded coat. She froze. Aching dread filled her chest. Grace looked up, bright and unashamed. I couldn't sleep, she'd said, shrugging. Just visiting. Daniel hadn't moved from his chair, buried in paperwork, as though Grace's presence was the most natural thing in the world. After that evening, Ilara had not spoken of what she'd seen. They're family, she told herself. They care about each other. But the self-reassurance felt brittle. Over the following weeks, she arrived home at odd hours, after staff meetings, after impromptu readings at the shop, sometimes just to wait for Daniel's call. Each time, she found the front door locked. She'd knock once, softly, hoping he heard, then twice, louder, worry humming in the back of her mind. Only after a long silence would the deadbolt click and the door swing open, revealing Daniel's apologetic face. Tonight, Ilara approached with trepidation. She pressed her palm against the cool brass of the doorknob, twisted, locked. She tapped. Daniel. No response. Her heartbeat pounded. She knocked again, muffled. Then the deadbolt turned. Daniel opened the door, eyes wide. His hair was mussed, sleeves rolled. Ilara, you're home early. She stepped inside, clutching her coat. You locked the door. He hesitated. I was studying for a meeting. He gestured to the study behind him. In there, Ilara's gaze drifted to the slightly ajar study door. She followed, heart fluttering. Inside, the desk lamp glowed on a pile of papers, an ordinary scene made strange by absence. Her breath hitched. Her world tilted and fractured simultaneously. Then she saw it, on the floor, an earring stud and a single white rose petal. Daniel cleared his throat. You should rest. Ilara stared at the petal, then met his gaze. He looked away. The silence stretched, suffocating. She realized then how locked doors kept secrets. and how every late night had become another fracture in their trust. She turned and left the study, voice low. "I'll just, get ready for bed." He watched her retreat. She heard the study door close softly behind her, and she felt utterly exposed. Unrelenting fear, and the night pressed in with heavy, unshakable certainty. The truth was waiting behind every door she couldn't open. Ilara entered the bathroom before sunrise, haunted by dreams of slipping rings and locked doors. She stared at the sink, where a single object lay, a delicate gold hoop earring, glinting beneath the dawn light. Her breath caught. She recognized it instantly. Grace's favorite earrings, the ones she'd last seen on the dresser at home. Her heart thundered as she lifted the earring into her hand. How had it come here? Grace never set foot in this apartment. This flat was Ilara's fortress against betrayal. She placed the earring on the countertop, preserving it like evidence. Each drip from the faucet echoed through her mind. Daniel entered, fresh from the shower, towel over his shoulders. He froze at the sight. His eyes darkened. He retrieved the hoop with a trembling hand. "This isn't yours," he said softly. Ilara nodded slowly. "It's Grace's." He set the towel on the sink's edge and faced her. Water droplets slid down his arms. "She came by yesterday evening." Ilara's pulse quickened. "Why?" Daniel's gaze fell to the floor. "She needed to talk. I told her to wait outside while I finished a call. She must have slipped inside." Ilara's chest tightened. "You asked her to wait outside?" He exhaled. "Yes. I thought she left. When I was done, the door was locked. I let her in." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And she waited in the hallway?" Daniel ran a hand through his damp hair. "She told me she couldn't see the ceremony without saying goodbye to us. I didn't want to upset her." Ilara folded her arms. "You didn't think I'd mind?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm sorry." Silence filled the room. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes shadowed with hurt. Daniel's apology felt small. He stepped forward. "I wish you would have been there." Ilara picked up the earring and examined it. "I wish you'd thought of me first." Her words trembled. "She isn't family when she betrays me." Daniel reached out, but she stepped back. "I will call her and ask her not to come again," he promised. Ilara dropped the earring back on the counter. "It's too late." She turned and left, her reflection blurred in the glass door. Behind her, the earring lay like a silent verdict. Grace had slipped in, and with her betrayal, she'd slipped through every lock and every vow. "I will rebuild," she whispered to herself as she closed the door, resolve hardening like forged steel. "Pain would not break me. Silence would be my armor against lies." The candlelit dining room was warm with laughter and soft conversation. Ilara sat between Daniel and Grace at her parents' long oak table, plates of fragrant stew and roasted vegetables before them. The windows were open, a gentle breeze ruffling the sheer curtains. Daniel poured wine for each of them, the rich red liquid catching the light. "Tell me about the bookshop," her mother prompted, napkin in lap. "You've been so busy these days." Ilara offered a small smile, lifting her glass. "It's quiet. I reorganized a new poetry section last week. We're hosting a local author reading soon." Her parents nodded approvingly. Grace leaned in, elbow grazing Daniel's arm. He didn't pull away. Ilara's heart flipped. She forced her gaze on her mother's kind eyes, as if searching for reassurance. "What about you, Grace?" her father asked. Grace's eyes sparkled as she described her latest art installation, a series of hand-painted silk scarves. Ilara listened politely, while Grace's hand slid over the table, fingertips brushing Daniel's wrist. A jolt of unease prickled Ilara's skin. Daniel stiffened imperceptibly, but smiled as Grace flitted back to her own story. Ilara's fork hovered over her plate. She blinked away the discomfort. "They're siblings," she told herself. "It's innocent." Conversation shifted to wedding plans. Grace spoke eagerly about floral arrangements and guest lists. At each suggestion, she reached out, her fingers brushing Daniel's wrist, forearm, even the back of his hand. Daniel's smile never wavered, though his brow creased now and then. Ilara cleared her throat. "I was thinking of a simple ceremony in the garden," she said, "under the rain tree." Grace tilted her head. Rain Tree is beautiful, but what about the lake? The sunrise there would be perfect for photos. She slid her hand across the table again. Daniel's glass wobbled slightly. Ilara's jaw tightened. She set down her fork. I love the garden, she insisted. Her voice rang out. Grace withdrew her hand, suddenly attentive. Of course, Ilara. Whatever you choose. A hush fell. Ilara sunk back, cheeks warm. Beneath the polite smiles, she could sense Grace's disappointment. And something else, an unspoken promise, in those fleeting touches. Daniel reached across and covered Ilara's hand. She felt the warmth of his palm and let out a shaky breath. Your garden idea is perfect, he said softly. It's where we got engaged. Her relief was immediate but fragile. Each time Grace rested her hand on Daniel, Ilara's gut tightened anew. She tried to focus on her napkin, tracing its embroidered edge. After dinner, her father raised his glass. To family, he declared. They echoed, sipping wine. Grace's hand hovered near Daniel's, then slid away as the toast ended. Ilara cleared the plates, excusing herself. She felt her pulse racing, the echo of Grace's touch lingering on Daniel's skin. In the kitchen, steam rose from the sink. Ilara pressed her back against the counter, closing her eyes. Her heartbeat sounded like distant thunder. This cannot go on, she thought. Her gut churned with suspicion and hurt. She realized the simple dinner had become a crucible, forcing her to confront the truth she tried to ignore. She opened her eyes to the tiled floor. The scent of rosemary and garlic hung in the air. I can't pretend anymore. Her fingers tightened into a fist. She breathed deeply, steeling herself for the confrontation that was coming. When she returned to the table, she would no longer be the silent observer. She would demand honesty. And at that moment, her gut refused to let her settle into false comfort again. Ilara had arrived at the old beach house to retrieve a box of family photos. The morning sun glimmered on the porch swing, and she inhaled salty air, trying to let calm wash over her. The house stood silent, empty except for the echoes of her childhood. Laughter, arguments, the soft creak of floorboards under tiny feet. She unlocked the door, carried the heavy box inside, and set it on the living room rug. She crouched to open the box, but paused, distracted by a sudden sense of intrusion. The walls felt thicker here, as if holding secrets she was not yet ready to hear. A muffled hiss reached her ears. She froze, listening. The sound came from the hallway beyond the kitchen, two voices, low and urgent. Her pulse quickened. She edged toward the hallway, heart pounding in her ears. Please, Grace, Daniel's voice whispered. I didn't plan this. Grace's reply was soft but insistent. You can't let her know. It'll ruin everything. Ilara's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall, peering around the corner. In the doorway stood Grace, hair loose, eyes wild with fear. Daniel's shoulders were slumped, face pale in the dim light of the guest bedroom. Every time she comes here, I feel like I want to tell her the truth, Daniel said, voice strained. But she's so trusting. Grace crossed her arms. You promised. I was your sister first. She took a step toward him, and her hand lingered on his arm. Daniel hesitated, then closed his eyes. I don't want to hurt her. Then we keep going, Grace whispered fiercely. We stay hidden until the wedding is over. Then we decide. She brushed a stray lock from her face. Till then, she can believe whatever she wants. Ilara covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. She felt trapped between rage and grief. Tears blurred her vision. Grace sighed. Go back to bed. She won't notice me here. Ilara's chest constricted. She sensed the world shifting beneath her. This was the secret she'd buried, the truth she'd feared. She waited until their footsteps receded down the hall. Then she slipped away without a sound. The box of photos remained untouched. The dusty air felt heavy with betrayal. Outside, a gull cried overhead. Ilara took a trembling breath, the wind whipping her hair into her face. Her vision blurred with tears, each one salted by betrayal. She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to quiet the echo of their voices reverberating. Everything I believed was a lie, she thought. Every promise, every whispered oath. The house felt like a tomb, and she like a stranger in her own memories. She opened her eyes and stared at the waves in the distance. The surf roared, relentless and indifferent. She realized then that her life was about to shift in ways she couldn't imagine. Ilara turned on her heel and walked toward her car, the box of photos forgotten on the living room rug. Each step felt like a goodbye, to innocence, to trust, to a future she had pictured with Daniel by her side. By the time she reached the shoreline, she understood the truth her heart had screamed. Some secrets aren't meant to be buried. They rise, unbidden, and change everything they touch. Ilara jolted awake to the shriek of wind against her windowpane. Her heart pounded as if trying to escape her chest. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting ghostly patterns across her quilt. She lay still, eyes wide, listening to the echo of her own ragged breathing. In her dream, she'd stood at the altar beneath the rain tree, the vows ringing hollow in her ears. Guests perched in white folding chairs watched her with polite smiles. Daniel stood beside her, ring box trembling in his hand. As she looked into his eyes, their clarity turned to ash, and he slipped away like smoke. Every whisper in the dream echoed her own fears, accusing her of weakness. Behind her, a hush of whispers swelled. She doesn't deserve him. He belongs with me. Ilara's legs buckled. She tried to call out, but her voice dissolved in the wind. Now, in the dawn stillness, the dream lingered like a shadow. She sat up, rubbing her temples. The wooden floor was cold beneath her feet as she padded to the window. The garden lay quiet, dewy grass shimmering. The rain tree stood sentinel, branches motionless in the night air. Instead of comfort, it felt ominous, as if the very ground knew her fear. Ilara wrapped her robe tighter and moved to the bathroom. She splashed water against her face, the cold shock steadying her. She stared at her reflection, eyes wide, lips pale. A tremor ran through her hands as she touched the edge of the sink. Dreams are nothing, she told herself, but the ache in her stomach refused to subside. She retrieved her phone and checked the time. 4:13 a.m. Too early for the bookstore. Too early for anything. Still, sleep was impossible. She retrieved a notebook from the nightstand, flipping to a blank page. Her fingers hovered over the pen. She wrote one sentence: "Trust broken never heals." Then paused, erased the sentence, started again. "If I don't confront them, I'll lose myself." My heart knew the truth, even if my mind resisted, Ilara thought. As the sky brightened from indigo to pale rose, Ilara dressed and poured herself a cup of tea in the kitchen. Steam curled upward, smelling of chamomile and hope. She stared at the teacup as though it held answers. Later that morning, Daniel found her on the porch steps, teacup in hand, staring at the rain tree's silhouette against the sunrise. His face was drawn. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ilara met his gaze, voice low. "I had a nightmare." She described the dream, each word stumbling out. Daniel's expression flickered between worry and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was just a dream." Ilara swallowed. It felt like a warning, like I'm already walking down that aisle alone. Daniel reached for her hand. "Ilara." She pulled away gently, bracing herself, feeling the calm before the storm of questions. "I need more than promises. I need truth." Daniel closed his eyes. "I will be honest. No more lies." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I need it today." She raised the teacup in a shaky salute. "And I need to know who I'm marrying." Daniel's shoulders sank. He stared at the cracked porcelain. "Then let's talk." She exhaled, stealing her nerve. Clarity shone cold in her chest. The rain tree shimmered behind her, its branches trembling in the morning breeze. It was a witness, a silent judge, and Ilara knew that when the conversation ended, nothing would ever be the same. Ilara's breath caught as she drove down the winding lane to her parents' beach house, the sky low and leaden, the ocean breeze carrying salt and secrets. She gripped the wheel, a box of family photographs on the passenger seat, each image a fragment of joy and trust now veiled in doubt. Stepping onto the porch, she hesitated. There was a weight in the air, as if the very walls held their breath. Inside, the grand foyer was hushed, the old clock ticking like a heartbeat, she could no longer trust. Elara laid the box on the foyer table, photographs peeking from the top. She moved toward the French doors leading to the screened porch, drawn by a soft murmur. Through the misted glass, she saw them. Daniel's arm around Grace's shoulders, Grace's head tipped back in laughter, the wicker swing creaking in the hush of their intimacy. Her heart thundered. The world narrowed to that single, desperate moment. Rain pelted the porch roof, each drop a drumbeat of betrayal. Daniel leaned forward, lips brushing Grace's neck as she laughed. No plea, no apology. Only the sweet hush of an unguarded kiss. Elara pressed her palm to the glass, the cold surface, a barrier she could not breach. Time fractured. She stumbled back against the frame, her pulse hammering. Memories tumbled, Grace's warm hand in hers, Daniel's gentle vows under the rain tree. They were lies now, slipping through her fingers like water. She wanted to cry out, to shatter the window, to tear them apart. But her voice caught, broken and silent. Footsteps behind her startled her. She turned to see her mother in the hallway, face ashen, eyes wide with recognition. Daniel emerged then, hair damp, coat draped over one shoulder, stunned into stillness. Grace turned too, frozen mid-laugh, regret sharpening her gaze. Their betrayal hung between them, raw and undeniable. No words came. The hush was deafening. Elara felt every photograph in that box scream with the truth she'd uncovered. The tidal roar of the ocean outside mocked her helplessness. Finally, she spoke, voice etched with steel. I saw everything. They remained silent, rooted in their shame. Elara turned on trembling heels and walked away, each step echoing through the empty halls. The box lay abandoned, memories scattered like broken glass. Outside, the rain tree's leaves trembled, as if bearing witness to the final fracture in her heart. Elara stood in the foyer for a heartbeat too long, the weight of what she'd seen anchoring her to the spot. She felt the world shift beneath her feet, as though all the ground she'd known had crumbled into the sea. Every echo of her mother's gasp, every frozen glance from Daniel and Grace, pressed into her like thunder. She didn't scream. The raw urge vanished in an instant, replaced by a hollow silence. Instead, she turned and walked down the hallway, footsteps slow, deliberate, each one a hammer strike of betrayal. The ancestral portraits lining the corridor seemed to whisper among themselves, judging, lamenting. The ivory walls that once felt like home now caged her in regret. In the guest room, she paused beside the bed where she'd once dreamed of a future with Daniel by her side. She pressed her palm to the quilted coverlet, tracing the floral embroidery with a shaking finger. Dreams of white gowns and whispered vows fell distant, frail as dandelion seeds in a storm. Beyond the lace curtain, the ocean roiled under slate skies. The horizon blurred into one endless swath of gray. Elara's world had narrowed to the hush around her, the space between truth and silence. She felt the box of photographs in her mind, images of laughter, of trust, now tainted by betrayal. A single droplet of water trailed down the windowpane, mirroring the tear that slid down her cheek. She closed her eyes, inhaling the salt-laced air, steadying herself against the thunder of her own heart. Each breath was a battle, each exhale a vow to survive this wound. She moved again, toward the door, the front door. Each step was an echo of her resolve. She would leave this house, leave behind the lies woven into its walls. And though the world had stopped turning, she would find her own axis, one built on truth and the unbreakable strength she discovered in her hurt. When she reached the threshold, she paused, hand on the doorknob. She glanced over her shoulder at their faces, pale and frozen, as if caught in amber. With a soft click, she stepped outside, the door swinging shut behind her. And in that echo, Elara felt the world shatter and rebuild itself anew. The next morning, Elara returned to the beach house at dawn, the sky bruised with dawn's first light. Daniel was in the foyer, coat in hand, waiting. Grace stood behind him, eyes rimmed red. Their guilt hung between them like a storm cloud. Elara's voice was flat. We need to talk. They led her to the living room, where sunlight sifted through gauzy curtains. The photographs remained scattered across the coffee table, silent witnesses. She sank into the armchair, drawing her legs close, steeling herself. Daniel swallowed. Ilara, Grace intervened, voice trembling. It just happened. We were lonely. We didn't plan it. Her words flailed in the air. Ilara felt a hollow ache. You kissed. You laughed. You plotted futures, together, without telling me. Daniel's gaze dropped. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Just happened. Ilara repeated quietly, words slamming like doors. Like a car crash. Like lightning. Grace bit her lip. We care about you. That hasn't changed. Ilara's laughter was sharp, sudden. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters now. Daniel reached for her hand. Please. She jerked it away. Don't touch me. They faltered into silence. The only sound was the distant crash of waves. Ilara felt the breadth of their betrayal expand, filling the room like a tide. Finally, she rose. You don't get to choose what happens to me. Her voice trembled, raw. You get to walk away in your white-knuckle denial, but I get the wreckage. Daniel closed his eyes. Grief etched on his face. Grace's shoulders slumped. Ilara turned toward the door. Say you're sorry again. It won't change the world I've lost. She left them there, two guilty figures in her shattered dream, while she carried the weight of truth beyond the broken threshold. Ilara arrived at home to find her parents gathered in the parlor, daylight washing their faces in pale light. Her mother rose, composed, lips pursed. Her father offered a stiff nod. We heard, her mother said, voice measured. Grace called. Ilara's chest tightened. So you know. Her father cleared his throat. We believe everything happens for a reason. Her mother joined in. Sometimes God moves in mysterious ways. Ilara's stomach turned. My fiancé and my sister betrayed me. You call that divine? Her mother's gaze flicked away. Love looks different sometimes. Maybe it's fate. Ilara laughed, cold, brittle. Fate. You call stolen kisses and secret rendezvous God's plan. Silence fell. Her father's shoulders slackened. Ilara, we're trying to heal this family. My family is already torn, she said softly. You just refuse to admit it. Her mother sighed. We need to accept what is. Ilara shook her head, tears burning her eyes. What is a lie? Her father rose, voice heavy. You'll come around. Time will heal. Ilara met his gaze. Time won't fix betrayal. Her mother's lips trembled. Grace is your sister. She's not my sister if she chooses him over me. Her parents exchanged weary looks. Ilara turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Behind her, their murmured pleas blurred with the hum of betrayal. She paused at the doorway of her old bedroom, hand on the frame. A single photograph on the dresser showed her and Grace as children, arms around each other, smiling in sunlight. Ilara's chest constricted. She stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click. The silence felt like sanctuary and like a cell. Outside, her parents' voices drifted. She pressed her back to the door, listening until their words dissolved into the hush. Then she exhaled, slow, shuddering. God's will. She knew better. The boutique's polished mirror reflected a stranger. Ilara stood in a simple ivory gown that hugged her shoulders and flowed to the floor, a dress she never imagined wearing alone. The lace bodice seemed to weigh on her chest, each stitch a memory of promises that unraveled. She traced the embroidery along the neckline, recalling how Daniel had kissed her beneath the rain tree in the very fabric of this dress. Now it felt like a shroud. Her reflection shimmered, beautiful and utterly foreign. Tears blurred the glass. The seamstress hovered behind her, whispering adjustments, but Ilara barely heard. Her mind drifted to Grace, Grace twisting Daniel's heart into something unrecognizable. She remembered the stolen kisses on the porch swing, the hush of betrayal that became her new reality. Ilara took a trembling step forward. The train swept the floor, brushing against dust motes that danced like memories. She reached out, fingertips grazing the mirror's edge. This isn't my future, she whispered. She turned, the fabric swishing beneath her. The seamstress placed a hand on her arm. You look radiant. Ilara shook her head. I'm not marrying him. The seamstress stepped back, confusion and sympathy mingling in her eyes. Ilara slipped from the gown, letting it pool at her feet. She stood in her slip, bare, unprotected, and real. She gathered the dress in her arms, clutching it like a fallen promise. Each fold held ghostly echoes of laughter and whispered vows. She carried it outside to the sunlit courtyard, where a breeze teased at the hem. Ilara laid the gown flat on the grass and knelt beside it. She closed her eyes and exhaled, the weight of loss pressing into her lungs. Then she stood, letting the morning light play across the silk and lace. With a gentle tug, she released the dress. It fluttered in the breeze, white as ghosts ascending. Ilara watched until the train vanished around the corner of the garden path. She felt a quiet ache, but beneath it, something new resolve. The dress she never wore was now a symbol of the life she refused to accept. She turned her back on the empty gown and walked away, barefoot on the dew-kissed grass, carrying the first fragile bud of hope in her heart. Laurel-scented candle flickered on the mantel, its flame dancing shadows across the walls. The antique chandelier above cast a muted glow on the leather armchair, where childhood drawings still lay beneath an envelope stained with tears. Each detail in this room, once the stage for happy family gatherings, now felt like a relic of a life that no longer existed. The air between us carried an unbearable weight. I stood in the dimly lit living room, arms crossed, chest tight with righteous anger. Grace sat on the edge of the couch, the hem of her dress brushing the patterned rug beneath her. Her vibrant energy, once the bright chaos I adored, had become a storm that shattered everything I held dear. Now it lay across the distance between us, silent and final. I remembered how we used to laugh until dawn, whispering secrets about stolen candies and midnight dares. Our bond felt unbreakable. But today, the same hands that once intertwined with mine had become the ones I no longer recognized. I saw her face, tear-streaked and remorseful, but I couldn't trust her apology. The betrayal was too deep, the knife too sharp. "I'm sorry, Ilara," Grace began, voice quivering. She reached out a hand, and I watched it hover, uncertain, between us like a fragile bird. But I wouldn't let her touch me. "Please," I said, quiet but firm. "Don't." Her shoulders collapsed with a sob, and she covered her face with trembling fingers. The apology I'd longed to hear had curdled into poison. I realized, in that moment, that forgiveness wasn't mine to give. Not after the stolen moments, the hidden kisses, the web of lies they spun while I lived a life of hope and trust. I took a breath, feeling the stillness press into my bones. "Everything we had is gone," I said, watching her shake with sobs. "You made your choice the moment you crossed that line." The words felt like stones dropping into a silent well, echoing against the walls of my heart. Grace's sobs quieted, and she looked up, eyes red and haunted. "I never meant to." "You meant to," I interrupted. Each stolen glance, each secret meeting, was a step away from me. I didn't deserve that. No sister should. Her lips quivered, but she remained silent. I felt no triumph, only an aching emptiness. This wasn't victory. It was the end of something precious. I stood and stepped back, clearing a space around me. "Consider me dead to you," I said, voice echoing in the still room. "You are my sister no longer." Grace's tears fell silently as she bargained with her gaze. "Please," she whispered, but her plea could not reach me. I turned toward the door. My heart felt both shattered and strangely calm, as though a storm had passed, leaving a clear sky in its wake. "Goodbye, Grace," I said, before stepping into the corridor. My footsteps sounded loud, each one carrying me further from the sister I had known, each one affirming the choice I made. As the door closed, I left her tears behind, sealing our bond in sorrow and finality. And in the hush that followed, I found the quiet space I needed to heal. I paused in the corridor, hand resting on the banister carved by my grandfather's hand, and let the hush of the old house wrap around me. Each step away whispered a vow. Never again would I sacrifice myself for another's choices. My path was uncertain, but at least it was mine and wholly unstoppable. Ilara stared at the front door, its brass knocker glinting in the sun and the peeling paint carrying decades of laughter and tears. The scent of jasmine rose from the garden, mingling with the salty breeze from the shore. Walls once vibrant now felt hollow, as if the house mourned her departure. The boxes were lined up like silent witnesses in the sunlit hallway. Each carton bore a handwritten label: books, clothes, mementos, dreams. In the living room, the sofa stood bare, the cushions removed and stacked neatly in a cardboard box. Ilara moved through the rooms methodically, her heart heavy with each item she placed into the containers. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in golden beams. The walls bore scratched fingerprints from years of family gatherings, birthday parties, late-night conversations. Every scratch, every dent held a memory she now equated with loss. She paused in the hallway, tracing a faded handprint that she and Grace had pressed onto the wall as children. She closed her eyes, letting grief wash through her. Ilara lifted a small wooden music box from a shelf. The porcelain ballerina inside had once twirled at her fingertips. She wound the key and listened to the tinkling melody, fragile, fleeting, like childhood innocence. Tears pricked her eyes. She placed it gently inside a keepsake box. Her father appeared in the doorway, face drawn. He cleared his throat. "Are you sure about this, Ilara?" She nodded, voice wavering. "I have to leave it behind to find myself." She met his gaze, surprised by the storm of regret and helplessness in his eyes. He said nothing more, stepping aside. Ilara watched him retreat down the hall before she returned to her task. She wrapped family photographs and slipped them into a box labeled memories. Each image felt like a knot in her chest: father's proud smile, mother's gentle eyes, Grace's infectious grin. Now each face seemed far away. In the dining room, she paused by the oak table where as children they practiced spelling by candlelight, and their mother carved initials into the wood. The table bore scars, a chipped corner from a fall, ink stains from schoolwork, and a hidden heart carved between them. In the master bedroom, she pulled the wedding portrait from the wall. Ilara paused, absorbing the image of herself and Daniel beneath the rain tree, smiling with hopeful eyes. She shivered, realizing how distant that promise felt. She placed a frame in a box. False promises. Closing the suitcases, Ilara felt a hollow ache. The old house was shelter and prison, cradle and coffin. She walked to the front door, keys dangling from her fingertips. Outside, the morning air smelled of salt and freedom. She unlocked the door, inhaled deeply, and stepped into sunlight. She paused on the front steps, looking back at the yellow facade. It gleamed, familiar and taunting. She raised her hand, as though making a final farewell. The wind caught her hair, a whisper of encouragement. Then she turned and walked down the walkway, each step echoing against her resolve. At the end of the drive, Ilara paused one last time. The house stood silent, its windows like watchful eyes. She felt a pang, then steeled herself. She climbed into her car, closed the door, and settled into the driver's seat. Hands on the wheel, she exhaled and drove away from the home that held her childhood. She did not look back again. Her future awaited beyond those gates, brightly unknown. In the quiet of her new attic retreat, sunlight glowed amber across the floorboards. Her desk, cluttered with quills, inkpots, and blank stationery, looked like both invitation and reckoning. Parched sheets lay waiting to carry her truth. Ilara hesitated, heart torn between confession and release. Ilara sat at her small desk in the attic bedroom she'd claimed after the move, sunlight filtering through a dusty window. A crisp sheet of paper lay before her, empty and expectant. She dipped a quill into black ink and paused, staring at the blank page. Each word she would write felt heavy with years of love, betrayal, and grief. She began to write. "Daniel, I need you to know how deeply you wounded me." Her hand trembled, and the words wavered on the page. She paused and scratched them out. The moment she recalled his gentle voice beneath the rain tree, asking her to marry him. Her chest tightened. She dipped the quill again and wrote, "I trusted you with my heart, and you broke every promise." Tears blurred her vision. She crumpled the paper into a tight ball and tossed it aside. Her gaze drifted to a framed photo on the desk. Daniel and Grace smiling at the beach house, unaware of her betrayal. She reached out, touching the glass. Pain flared like a hot coal at her chest. She pulled another sheet from the stack and started anew. Grace, how could you betray the sister you loved? Her pen scratched furiously as memories flooded back. Midnight phone calls, hushed whispers behind closed doors, Grace's voice confessing that it happened just because. She wrote with rage and sorrow, the ink blotting as tears dropped onto the paper. As each line poured from her pen, her heartbeat thundered, her vision blurred, her hands ached with the effort of translating pain into ink. Every word tasted bitter on her tongue, like swallowing broken promises. She paused to steady herself, breathing through the ache that rippled in her chest. Halfway through, she paused, inhaling sharply. The attic felt oppressive, shadows gathering in the corners. She realized that every sentiment she poured onto the page would unleash her pain, but could not heal the wound. She tried again. To both of you, I say this, but her heart recoiled. How could she distill years of hurt into neat paragraphs? She stood and moved to the window, staring at the garden below. The rain trees' leaves appeared silver in the late afternoon light. She felt the breeze, tasted freedom in its cool touch. The letter fluttered in her hand, a burden she didn't want to carry. Ilara returned to her desk, stacking the sheets into a neat pile. She slid them into a drawer labeled unsent. She closed it softly, as though sealing a vault. The attic felt lighter, as though relinquishing the need for confrontation had lifted some weight. She picked up the framed photo and smiled sadly. She didn't need to send this letter. She didn't need their responses. She had her own voice now, stronger than grief. She slipped the photograph into her bag, deciding to carry only memories that served her growth. The unsent letters remained hidden, silent testaments to a past she chose to leave behind. In the hush after dusk, Ilara extinguished her lamp and climbed the narrow stairs silently. The attic's silent hold now carried only her quiet strength. The unsent letters lay undisturbed, and she embraced the dawn of a new self, untethered from sorrow, guided by the unwavering light of her own resilience. She didn't know how far she'd driven before the wooden sign welcomed her to Marisol Bay. A flicker of excitement lit her chest. What was she searching for? Refuge, a fresh start, a chance to become someone new. Ilara drove along the coastal road as dawn broke, the horizon a wash of pastel hues. She held the steering wheel with one hand and the scent of coffee in a travel mug with the other. Her luggage lay in the back seat, each bag a chapter she had closed. The salt breeze ruffled her hair as she passed rolling dunes and clusters of fishing boats. By mid-morning, she reached the small seaside town. Weathered cottages lined the narrow streets, whitewashed walls glowing in the sun. Fishermen mended nets on porches, and children chased seagulls along the quay. No one asked her name. No one expected her past. She felt an ease she hadn't known since before the betrayal. Ilara parked beside a garden gate painted a cheerful blue. She stepped out and inhaled the air, brine and blooming wildflowers. The town smelled of hope. She walked along cobblestones toward the cluster of shops at the center. A bakery, a general store, and a bookstore with mismatched chairs outside for readers. She paused before the shop windows, examining handwritten signs. Fresh bread daily. Local produce. Stories for every soul. Her eyes lingered on the bookstore. A faded wooden sign swung on rusty hinges. Ilara felt a tug in her chest. She opened the door, and a bell chimed. The owner looked up from behind the counter. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "Welcome," she said. "First time." Ilara nodded. "I just moved to town." The woman smiled. "We're glad you're here. Looking for anything special?" Ilara considered. A book on sailing? Or maybe local legends? The owner wiped her hands on an apron. "I have both. Let me show you." She led Ilara to a shelf lined with leather-bound volumes and sea charts. Ilara ran her fingers along spines that spoke of adventure and discovery. For a moment, the betrayal felt distant. After browsing, Ilara purchased a small volume of poems by a local poet. The store's bell rang as she left. Outside, a young man greeted her with a nod and held open the door. "Thanks," she said. She walked to a bench overlooking the water, opened the book, and inhaled its musty pages. The rhythmic words echoed the lapping waves. Ilara felt something stir in her chest, the beginnings of belonging, fragile but real. As she turned a page, a sharp pang struck: Daniel's betrayal, Grace's tears, her parents' disbelief. Yet here, those memories seemed distant echoes across water. She let her mind wander, imagining herself forging new stories and identity one sentence at a time. The town embraced her with gentle and welcoming warmth. As the sun climbed, she wandered to the market square. People greeted her with warm smiles. Morning. Beautiful day. No one probed her story. She smiled back, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. At noon, she stopped by the bakery. She purchased a warm roll drizzled with honey and sat on a stone wall. She savored each bite and watched the tide. In this town where no one knew her name, Ilara discovered that anonymity could be a gift. She felt free to breathe, free to become more than the betrayed fiancé or wounded sister. She was simply Ilara, a woman with a book in hand, a road ahead, and the open sky above. Ilara discovered the small cafe by accident, a faded green door at the end of a side street, hand-painted sign reading Marisol Tea and Provisions. Curiosity led her inside. The air was warm with the scent of chamomile and cinnamon, and sunlight glinted through lace curtains. A long wooden table stretched down the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Patrons sipped tea from delicate porcelain cups, murmuring in gentle voices. Ilara pushed open the door and felt the hush. Shelves lined with glass jars held loose leaves, jasmine buds, rooibos, peppermint. Sunbeams danced on copper teapots resting atop a steaming stove. An elderly man in a tweed cap offered a nod and a smile as she stepped in. "Care for a seat?" he asked, voice soft like velvet. Ilara hesitated, but then slid into an empty chair opposite a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair. "Is this okay?" she asked. "Of course," the woman replied, offering a cup. "I'm Marin. Welcome." Marin poured amber tea into Ilara's cup, the liquid shimmering. "First time here?" Ilara nodded. "I just moved to town." She inhaled the spicy aroma. "I'm still finding my place." Marin's eyes were kind. "We all have journeys. Here, you'll find company when you need it." Ilara took a sip, savoring the warmth that seeped into her bones. Around the table, more faces turned toward her. An artist sketching wildflowers, a fisherman with calloused hands, a teacher with paint-splattered sweater. They represented a tapestry of lives entwined by the town's quiet spirit. As the group warmed to each other, stories spilled like creeks overflowing their banks. Each tale stitched Ilara into a quilt of belonging she had never imagined possible. Marin clapped her hands softly. "Tea's on the house for new friends." The others murmured agreement. Ilara felt a knot untangle in her chest. She raised her cup in a silent toast. Conversation began to flow. The fisherman spoke of the morning catch, the teacher of local festivals, the artist of hidden coastal trails. Ilara listened, offering shy smiles, then began to share a little about herself, her love for old books, her fondness for poetry, her journey from heartbreak to hope. Each revelation was met with encouraging nods. When she confessed she once worked in a bookstore, the artist's eyes lit up. "Then you'll fit right here," she said, pulling a sketchbook filled with think book illustrations. "You understand stories." Laughter threaded through the group. The fisherman produced a small jar of sea salt he'd harvested that morning. "For your cooking," he said. Marin offered scones, made with honey from her beehives. The teacher promised invitations to art classes. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. She realized these strangers, drawn together by tea and gentle friendship, were weaving her into new roots. They hadn't known her name, but they embraced her spirit. When the afternoon light waned, Marin folded her hands. "Anytime you need tea or company, you're welcome." She patted Ilara's hand. The fisherman tipped his cap in farewell. The teacher smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The artist sketched a quick portrait, leaving it on the table. Ilara stepped outside with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The green door closed behind her, and her heart felt full. In Marisol Bay, she discovered that family could be chosen, cups of tea shared, and kindness offered by those who once were strangers. She walked back through cobblestone streets with a light step, carrying the knowledge that this table was now hers as well. Ilara woke within the hush of dawn without the familiar ache that once pressed upon her chest each morning. It had been days since the memory of Daniel's betrayal had startled her thoughts. Instead, she felt an unexpected lightness, as though layers of grief had fallen away overnight. Sunlight streamed through her window, painting the walls with soft gold, and the weight she carried for months seemed distant, like a half-remembered dream, fading with the waking day. Breathing deeply, she recognized the power of release in reclaiming her life. Gratitude coursed silently through her veins. She smiled with hopeful certainty. For the first time since the betrayal, Ilara realized she did not miss waking to pain. Instead, she savored simple rituals, brewing tea at sunrise, selecting poems to read aloud, and tending to the small balcony garden she had cultivated. Each morning she watched tender shoots of lavender and mint unfurl, symbols of resilience and renewal. She took comfort in these green companions, their quiet growth a testament to life's persistence even after devastation. In that gentle routine, she found a steady rhythm that required no apology and promised only forward motion. Her soul drank deeply of this newfound peace. In time, memories of Daniel and Grace receded further, like stars fading at dawn's approach. The flash of their kiss, once seared into her mind, now felt like a film she could pause, rewind, and finally eject from her heart. She no longer lay awake haunted by whispers or tears. Instead, she walked barefoot along the shoreline, the cold surf lapping at her ankles, and allowed the rhythmic pulse of the waves to guide her thoughts toward hope. Each footprint in the smooth sand marked progress. She embraced freedom not as absence of pain, but as affirmation of inner strength. In the quiet evenings, she returned to her journal and wrote pages of reflection. On paper she named her fears, her hopes, her triumphs. She read those entries back, marveling at how far she had risen from the ruins she once felt buried beneath. Along the way she discovered compassion for her younger self, the one who once believed love would conquer all obstacles. Now she understood that boundaries could coexist with forgiveness, and that strength could bloom from suffering. Each sentence in her journal became a stepping stone paving the path toward a life of authenticity and renewed purpose. She realized she no longer harbored anger toward the past, but carried a solemn gratitude for its lessons. Betrayal had been the crucible that forged her resilience. She honored her scars as badges of survival rather than stains of shame. When images of Daniel or Grace flickered in her mind, she invited compassion instead of rage. She forgave them not for their sake, but for her own liberation. In doing so, she sealed the fissures in her soul with empathy. Her heart, once brittle, became a vessel for courage and unwavering self-respect, open to the love she had earned fully. As quiet days turned into weeks, Ilara recognized the transformation within her. She smiled without guilt, laughed without apology, and walked through life with a graceful certainty that was hers alone. She no longer defined herself by what was taken, but by what she reclaimed. Her story continued to unfold, anchored by her choices and illuminated by self-love. She understood that healing was not linear, but a tapestry woven from resilience, courage, and compassion. Each morning she greeted the sunrise with open arms, ready to embrace the unknown. In that openness, she found joy, purpose, peace. My heart felt whole. The first time Ilara met Julian, she was repairing a wobbly shelf in the bookstore with too many reference books teetering on the edge. She balanced a heavy volume in one hand, her heart fluttering with the memory of past fractures. Julian knelt beside her quietly, lifting the other end of the shelf with calm assurance. His dark-skinned hands were strong but gentle. He secured the broken bracket without a word. When he finished, he looked up at her and offered a small smile that said, "I see you." In that moment, she felt herself breathe easier. Julian did not rush to fill empty spaces with grand gestures or hollow promises. Instead, he listened. That afternoon, while she cataloged new arrivals, he stood nearby, repairing chipped wood on the checkout counter. Every so often, he would glance up and ask, "Do you need help?" When she did, He was there, not to overshadow her, but to honor her capacity to care for that bookstore herself. The unspoken trust he offered felt as rare as sunlight after a storm. Over the next weeks, Julian became a steady presence. He arrived each morning with the sunrise, bringing fresh coffee and kind reassurance. He spoke of his work as a carpenter, how every board he shaped carried the fingerprint of its maker, how imperfections could become features with the right attention. Ilara watched him trace the grain of wood with his fingertips and realized she too bore imperfections that did not lessen her worth. Julian's respect for wood mirrored his respect for her. One crisp evening, they shared tea in the back alley of the shop beneath strings of lanterns. Ilara spoke of her journey, of fleeing a life of broken promises and family fractures. Julian nodded, sipping his tea. "I believe every scar has a story worth honoring," he said softly. His words settled over her like a warm blanket. He asked no questions that might reopen old wounds. He simply acknowledged her truth and offered companionship. When autumn leaves began to carpet the streets, Julian invited her to his workshop. The scent of sawdust and varnish surrounded them. He showed her a bookshelf he had crafted for her shop. Sturdy oak, carved with a delicate rain-tree motif. "I wanted something that reminded you of your strength," he explained. Ilara ran her palm across the carved roots, feeling the sureness of each grain. In that gift, she recognized deep care, a care that honored her journey without trying to rewrite it. In Julian's presence, Ilara discovered that filling gaps did not mean erasing absence. It meant standing by her as she reclaimed space for herself. He honored her solitude when she needed it, offered support when she asked, and celebrated her resilience without attempting to rescue her. Through him, she learned that true strength grew not from masking imperfections, but from honoring them and allowing new growth to emerge. And in this quiet partnership, her heart began to beat in a new, hopeful rhythm. Ilara signed the final papers on the small cottage by the sea with trembling excitement. The real estate agent smiled and handed her the key, a simple brass loop that felt heavier with promise than any gold ring. She stepped across the threshold into empty rooms, waiting to be filled with her life. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating dust motes like floating gems. She inhaled the scent of fresh paint and possibility and felt a thrill of sovereignty. This home was truly hers. Over the next days, she unpacked boxes one by one. Her favorite books found a place on newly mounted shelves. Family photos of happier times, childhood laughter, grandparents' embraces, took spots above the fireplace. In the kitchen, she arranged pots of herbs, basil, rosemary, mint. Their green leaves nodded in the morning breeze through the window. Each plant felt like a guardian of her sovereignty, grounded in soil and devoted to growth. In the garden, she dug a square patch near the back door and planted a small sapling, a young rain tree she had nurtured from seed. She knelt on the earth, feeling its cool heft, and murmured, "Grow strong." She watered the fragile roots, promising patience and care. Each drop sank into the soil, carrying her vow to nurture her own spirit as tenderly as she would that tree. With every push of clods against her fingertips, she cemented her claim on this new chapter. Inside, she painted the walls in soothing hues of dove gray and soft cream. She chose furnishings that reflected her restored self. A sturdy wooden desk by the window for writing, a plush armchair for reading, and a wide bed to anchor her restless thoughts. She draped an indigo shawl across the back of the couch, an echo of twilight skies, and arranged scented candles that smelled of sandalwood and jasmine. In every detail, she found joy in creating a sanctuary. One morning, she invited Julian to her new home. He arrived carrying a handcrafted bench for the front porch, his smile radiant in the soft dawn. Together they set it in place, the grain of the wood complementing the wisteria vines climbing the trellis. Julian stood back and nodded approvingly. "It's yours," he said, "a place to rest whenever you need." Ilara felt her heart expand, anchored by companionship and home. At dusk, she stepped outside and sat beneath the young rain tree. The sapling's leaves rustled in the breeze, slender branches reaching skyward. Ilara placed her hand on the warm trunk and whispered, "This is my peace." She closed her eyes, and let the sea air fill her lungs. In that moment she knew her name was hers alone, her peace self-forged, and her life unscripted by anyone but herself. A crisp white envelope arrived on her doorstep, sealed with her mother's familiar handwriting. Ilara stared at the elegant calligraphy, a wedding invitation from Grace. Beneath it, a single sheet of cream paper bore a note. Maybe someday you'll understand. Love, Grace. She held the invitation at arm's length, breaths coming slow. Images of stolen kisses and whispered justifications flickered through her mind, but the hurt that once stung her chest had softened into something gentler, understanding even. She thought of the world they would celebrate. Friends in pastel gowns, vows spoken under borrowed hope, promises destined to echo with her absence. She felt neither anger nor longing. Instead, she felt a small surge of compassion for her sister, a sister who had courted her own folly and now sought absolution. Ilara slipped Grace's note into her journal and closed the pages, sealing the sentiment in ink and memory. That evening, she found herself dressed in simple linen, standing before a mirror. Her reflection looked serene, eyes bright with quiet triumph. She placed the invitation on her dresser and then picked it up again. Instead of burning it or discarding it, she slipped it into a slender frame, an artifact of closure rather than grievance. She positioned it above her desk, where she could see it each day and remember how far she had come. On the morning of Grace's wedding, Ilara brewed a pot of rosemary tea and sat on her porch bench. Sunlight danced across the wisteria blossoms, petals drifting like gentle confetti. She raised her cup in a toast, to healing, to self-determination, to the courage of endings and new beginnings. She drank deeply, savoring the bittersweet warmth that mirrored her complex emotions. Later, Julian arrived bearing fresh bread and wildflowers from the market. He greeted her with a smile and placed the bouquet on the table. No questions were asked about the invitation. Instead, he offered unwavering presence. Ilara poured them both tea and gestured to the framed envelope. "My sister's wedding," she said softly. He nodded and offered his hand. "You choose how to live today," he said. She squeezed his hand gratefully. As the afternoon light waned, Ilara stood beneath the young rain tree, dressed in linen and wildflowers in her hair. She raised her glass of tea to the horizon. "To my own path," she whispered. The sapling's leaves rustled in gentle applause. She turned away, leaving Grace's wedding for the past it belonged to, and stepped forward into the promise of her own unfolding story. Ilara did not attend the wedding. Instead, she walked beneath the early autumn sun to her favorite bench by the shore, where the tide whispered its ancient lullaby. The invitation lay in her pocket, folded but unforgotten. She wore a simple white dress that caught the breeze, letting the fabric billow, like sails, carrying her toward new horizons. In her hand, she held a single cup of chamomile tea, steam curling toward the sky. She settled onto the bench and gazed at the rain tree she had planted, its sapling trunk now thickening with promise. The branches arched gracefully overhead, leaves dancing in the sea breeze. Below, the water glimmered like molten silver. Ilara sipped her tea, the gentle bitterness a reminder that growth often followed hardship. She inhaled deeply, heart brimming with peaceful certainty. Her phone lay silent in her lap. No messages from Daniel, no pleas from Grace, no echoes of God's will. Instead, there was only the steady rhythm of her own pulse, affirming that her life belonged to her alone. She closed her eyes, listening to the waves and the rustle of leaves. Each breath was a testament to the strength she had forged in solitude and choice. When the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of rose and gold, Ilara rose and walked to the water's edge. She let the surf wash over her ankles, grounding her in the present moment. Beneath the surface, pebbles shifted and settled, just as her own heart had found stability after so much tumult. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I am whole." As dusk settled, she picked up a smooth shell and placed it in her pocket, a small talisman of closure and new beginnings. Turning back to the rain tree, she traced the engraved initials she had carved months before. Yar MS. A smile curved her lips. The initials stood for both her name and the promise she had kept. Ilara Reborn, my story. Walking away from the shore, Alara held her head high. The world behind her lay in peaceful quiet. The path ahead glimmered with possibility. They had called it God's will. But she knew truth. It was human weakness, choice, and consequence. And her peace? That was hers. That was her choice. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, comment, and share. Also turn on the bell to get more of our videos. See you in the next story.